I'd like to take a chance now to say an official good morning, not only to those of you who are here in Access, but those who are in the worship center in Sarpy County and who are watching on the internet. To all of you, I say good morning. Good morning. Glad you guys have all come here today for our next installment on Proverbs. Now, we know by now that Proverbs is all about wisdom, and wisdom is not something that's greater than morality, but wisdom builds on moral issues. As a matter of fact, wisdom is designed for the 80% of decisions in life that you have that the moral rules just don't apply. We've learned a number of things about wisdom, that wisdom is a path that you walk on your entire life. It's not a door that you walk through on a one-time experience, but it keeps on building as life goes on. We've learned that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And if you center your life on God, that takes you a long way down the pike towards living a life that is a wise life. We've learned that wisdom applies to all kinds of areas, including investing in the next generation and work and internal issues like pride. And so this morning we're going to tackle another issue that comes out of the Proverbs, and it's there just because it's so prevalent inside the Proverbs if you read through it. It's probably not something that I would have picked to be able to talk about today. It's not a forte of mine. Actually, I'm kind of mad that I have to speak on this subject. It's the subject of anger. Now I'm a little bit mad about preaching on it. So everybody gets angry, right? From time to time. It's a human emotion that engages every single one of us in this room. And we have to ask the question, how do we respond to anger? Now, I know there have been at least a couple of times already this year that I have responded in bad ways towards anger. And I'm a little bit ashamed to tell you some of these stories, but I'm going to anyway. The last time, or one time that happened just a few weeks ago, I had come in from a week where I was gone during a better part of the week and trusted some of my staff to take care of some things for Sunday morning. I came in late Saturday night in order to do the last-minute pieces for my message, and I found that the things were not as I expected them to be. And, it was two staff that were involved that are some of my best staff, that are smart and godly and love me and love this church and would never do anything to subvert things, but somehow something inside of me just cracked open. Because I realized that I would have to rewrite a significant part of my message because the peripheral stuff wasn't done the way that I had hoped it would be done. And after pouting for a little while, and then stewing on my pouting for a little while, I decided in the safety of my own office to send out an email. You ever done that? And this email was filled with capital letters, which those of you who don't do a lot of email, that means I'm angry and I'm yelling at you. And big words like never, never, never. And it's the kind of thing that a pastor should just not send out to a staff, not under any kind of circumstances, especially not when you're angry. And then I picked up my computer and I threw it through the wall. No, I didn't really do that. But I did have to go back the next day and first send an email apology because it was not like 30 minutes before I thought, oh my, what have I done? And I had to send an email apology and visit both of those staff and apologize to them, and they were very gracious and forgiving. But I wish I didn't have to go through that in order to be able to make up for something that made me angry. So the question I have for you is, when's the last time you got angry? When's the last time you got angry? When's the last time you got angry and expressed it in ways that really were not the most God-honoring ways? What happened? Was it the last time the dog messed the floor? When the copier jammed at work? When you were dealing with a toddler who was not acting like an adult? How'd you respond in those moments? Maybe you responded like our friends on this video. Turn your attention to the screens. right. Yeah, a little too close to real life to be comfortable, isn't it? That stuff really happens. Well, dictionary.com says anger is a strong feeling of displeasure or hostility. And Horace, the ancient writer, said that anger is a temporary madness. Isn't that a good definition of anger and what it does to you? It is a temporary madness. And when we look at the biology of this, we'll find out exactly why that is. Proverbs chapter 29, verse 22 says this, "An angry man stirs up dissension, and a hot-tempered one commits many sins." You know, when you're angry, you wind up having physiological reactions, things that respond and people know that you're angry, like bulging veins and tightened muscles and an ugly face. Your face can wind up looking like this guy if you're angry. The weatherman thingy is not working. Oh, we're at the end of the slides. Okay, let's go back all the way to the beginning to the guy with the angry face. Are we ready here? Da, 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 da. Okay, did you see the big word of the week? I hope not, because it's a surprise. Okay, here we go. Your face, if you're angry at the clicker not working, could look something like this. Okay, that whole clicker thing just kind of spoiled it, didn't it? I mean, the only thing they did to this guy is ask him if he wanted onions on his sandwich, and off he goes. Anyway, anger itself is not something that is inherently evil. Anger is an emotion that we have that's not necessarily wrong. As a matter of fact, sometimes it's good. Anger can be a gift from God, because anger is a physiological response in fearful moments that will accelerate your heart rate, pump adrenaline into your system. It can be very helpful in certain moments of life, like if you're a soldier in battle. It will help to motivate and sharpen and give energy. It'll sharpen your awareness and your reflexes. And whether you're in battle or maybe in a high-energy athletic competition, anger can sometimes be a force that's used for good. It can also be a motivation that helps to deal with injustices, either interpersonal injustices or societal injustices. And I think that it can be argued that our society is a much better place because groups of people became angry about injustices. Think about what might have happened if the civil rights movement never existed in our country, or the women's suffrage movement, or the battle against slavery, or even our very own independence, many of which were motivated by people that were angered because of injustices that there are in this world. Sometimes anger can be used as a motivation to do a whole lot of good. A little while back, I was hanging out with a Christian organization that is not Christ Community Church. And I was in a situation where I began to suspect that funds that were given by well-meaning, godly individuals were being misused by the leaders for personal luxuries and travel expenses and so forth. And to be honest, I found out about this, and I got very mad because there was an injustice of misspending the money that was going on. And I'm embarrassed to say that in the moment, I kind of lost my cool in a public forum where I really shouldn't have lost my cool. And I had to go back and apologize to 3 different people about the way that I handled myself in that moment. But what I found was the very next day, because of that, they began to make some revisions in their policies and their procedures in order to ensure that the money was spent well. And I was glad to see that. Sometimes anger can be used for good purposes. Anger certainly can't always be evil, because if you read through the Bible, you find that God gets angry. There are lots of places in the Old Testament that talk about God's anger, even about how God's anger burns. And back in February, Gavin gave a message about the anger of God from the book of Hosea. So we know anger can't always be evil if God is good and God gets angry. Jesus himself, we know, got angry in the temple when he drove out the money changers and he turned over tables and he said, "My house is to be a house of prayer and you've made it into a den of robbers." If Jesus is morally perfect and he had anger, even anger that was expressed against injustice or immorality at the time, then anger must not always be something that's wrong. It's not always bad. But it's important to understand anger in order for us to be able to handle it in a way that's godly and appropriate. Because there are great ways to handle your anger, and there are bad ways to handle your anger. It's important to understand it first. Now, our big word of the week this week comes from a term that was coined by Daniel Goleman in 1996 to talk about what happens in the brain when anger takes root. What happens in the brain is called an amygdala hijack. And I thought that was a fun word to make big word of the week, so everybody say the word amygdala hijack. See, amygdala hijack. And what this means is your brain begins functioning in ways that it normally doesn't function. Normally what happens is your sensory input comes into the thalamus, and the thalamus sends signals out to the neocortex. That's where your logic and reasoning functions are, and it sorts through the sensory stimuli in such a way that it'll be able to send signals then to the amygdala, which is the seat of your emotions. And the amygdala will respond with emotion and with chemicals such as adrenaline that pour into your body so that you can respond in dangerous or stress-filled kinds of situations. The problem is, sometimes the situation becomes so dangerous or stress-filled that the thalamus communicates directly with the amygdala, taking away all of the logical responses that would normally be in between the thalamus and the amygdala. That's called an amygdala hijack. And what happens in those moments is you begin to respond irrationally. Have you ever been in that place where you're so angry that you do things, you say things, you yell things that you would never say if you were in your right mind? But in that moment where your logic and reasoning is taken out of play, you say those things, you slam doors, you cuss, you do things that you regret and you might not ever do in another kind of a situation. That is the amygdala hijack. So, we see what biologically happens when anger takes root. Now, that's not all there is to anger. Anger is a very complex thing that comes from a variety of different places. The number one place that anger comes from is when you have a blocked will. For example, you're trying to accomplish a goal that you want to accomplish. It may be a very good and noble and right kind of a goal, but circumstances beyond your control or a person gets in the way of you being able to accomplish the goal that you're trying to get towards. Your will is blocked, and that blocked will is the number one reason for anger. Most of the time, if you get angry, you can go back and diagram what was my goal, what stopped me from getting my goal, and find out what was the immediate cause for you being angered. But there's other things as well. Past pain can be a huge contributor to anger. You may get angry in a situation, and what you're responding to is not really the pain or fear or stress of the immediate situation. You're responding to some painful things that happened in your past, that maybe happened in your family of origin, or happened in school when you were in junior high, or from a counselor at a youth camp a long, long time ago. Maybe it's a boss, or maybe it's somebody in power, or maybe it's a person who divorced you. But you've got this latent anger that's brewing inside of you because you never dealt with issues that come from your past. And so things come in the present that trigger that, and that causes anger. Fear is another huge reason for anger. Fear and hurt oftentimes, or anger is oftentimes a mask for fear and for hurt. And in an environment where you want to show up in a particular type of emotional state, you don't want to show the people around you that you're afraid or that you're hurt. And so you use anger to mask those things because it gives you a sense of power or of being in control. Injustice can be a huge contributor to anger, and that's one of the ways that anger can be a very positive thing, where you see a person or a group of people that are being oppressed in an inequity of power. That may be a contributor to anger. Some of our most susceptible people to anger in our congregation and in our culture are people who have served in the military. And post-traumatic stress disorder is one of those things that continues to revisit a person in anger. Why is this the case? Well, it's the case because when you're in battle, oftentimes it is a helpful thing to give in towards your anger, to sharpen your reflexes and your awareness. That there are people who get into a pattern when they're in battle to giving into fury and rage against the enemy. But it can create some deep behavioral trenches that can be hard to get out of. It's interesting what Solomon has to say about military people because he saw this connection between the warriors of his day as well. In Proverbs 16:32, it says, "Better a patient man than a warrior, a man who controls his temper than one who takes a city." Now, Anger can fester and grow and get worse as time goes on. Regardless of the things that wind up contributing towards anger, anger can get worse over time. As a matter of fact, there are some people, and you'll generally find these people as folks who are middle-aged or older, senior citizens, that have had a wound in their past. And when you combine anger with unforgiveness and years of time, they begin to believe that they're actually justified in being angry over time. And that creates the worst form of anger, which is bitterness, deep-seated anger that lasts for years to come. And you'll find these middle-aged and older people not only being angry, but having a sense of being justified in their living a life of particular kind of anger. And whether it's bitterness or other kinds of anger, the implications of anger are very strong, and they're as sure can be. Proverbs chapter 30, verse 33 talks a little bit about this. It says, "For as churning the milk produces butter, and as twisting the nose produces blood," isn't that a graphic illustration right there? As twisting the nose produces blood, as sure as those things happen, so stirring up anger produces strife. You want to have pain in your life and the lives of people around you? Will stir up anger. And the data on this is just irrefutable these days. Solomon knew it a long, long time ago, but now we have proof from studies and so forth that demonstrates that anger is actually the most destructive emotion if you give yourself over to it in a chronic way that human beings experience. This is, first of all, very true in the physical realm. Did you realize that people who are chronically angry have 3 times the risk for high blood pressure, 3 times the risk of heart attack, and twice the risk of coronary artery disease? People who are chronically angry oftentimes have problems with headaches. From the tightening of your neck muscles and the muscles in your head, it causes tension headaches, migraines, and can lead to insomnia. And that's not even to mention gastrointestinal issues, brain function, neuron damage, and strokes, and much, much more. They link anger to all of these different problems you experience physically. In addition to this, there are behavioral issues that come as a result of anger. Did you know that intensely angry people are 65% more likely to be smokers than those who are not intensely angry? That people who are intensely angry will give themselves over to emotional binge eating. If they don't know how to express their anger in healthy ways, they'll find themselves using food as a way to comfort themselves. Folks who give themselves over to anger are far more likely to drink. And you know that when you drink and become drunk, you wind up giving in to your anger again, and it perpetuates the cycle even worse. There's implications in the job category as well. People who are angry are 5 times more likely to be injured on the job than people who aren't. They're also more likely to quit, more likely to be fired, and more likely to settle for a job that they really don't like. In the relational world, there are huge implications for anger. If you're somebody who is a married person, being unable to deal with your anger alienates your spouse. It causes tension around the house wherever you go. It prevents you from experiencing intimacy. It has effects on you in the bedroom. And in its worst case scenario, it can lead towards separation and divorce. If you're somebody who has friends, an inability to control your anger can lead to a loss of friendships because people don't like having anger constantly directed at them. Or they don't like having anger constantly directed at other people when they're in your presence either. If you have kids and you express anger towards them on a regular basis, your kids may grow up hating you. They may grow up resenting you. They may grow up not talking to you. Or worse yet, they may grow up being just like you. Now, there are a lot of different ways to respond to anger, a natural response that comes up in our life that are important to take a look at. Proverbs 29:11 gives us a tip where it says, "A fool gives full vent to his anger, but a wise man keeps it under control." A fool gives full vent to his anger. If you look at how anger could be expressed when that bubbling lava begins to burst up inside of you, you have some choices about what to do with the anger. And it could be seen as being on a scale. On the far right end of the scale is, or left end from your perspective, the far left end of the scale is the cork. You know, you can keep that anger corked and bottled up inside, and internalize it and drive it deep. On the far right end of the scale is the explosion like Mount Vesuvius, erupting lava on people all around you. And some people, when they experience anger, decide to cork it and hold it inside. Some experience Mount Vesuvius. And Proverbs 29 says, a fool does this, gives full vent to his anger. But a wise man keeps it under control. The truth of the matter is that research shows that it's unhealthy to be at either end of these spectrums. That giving full vent to your anger, as they tried to persuade us that we should be doing in the 1970s, to hit pillows and yell out and other things that would vent our anger, turns out that the people who vent their anger on a regular basis become increasingly angry as time goes by. And the people who bottle up their anger on the inside, well, those people wind up having deep-seated issues that wind up leaking out in other unhealthy ways at all of the wrong times in their life. So I think the question that we need to ask is, well, if God experiences anger, what can we learn from how God deals with the anger that he deals with? And what you can find is that there's a place in the middle that's called being slow to anger. So you have no anger, you have blow-up anger, and you have slow to anger right here in the middle. In the Psalms it teaches the Lord is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, and abounding in love. It's not his nature to never get angry, but he's got a very long fuse before there are consequences for the anger that is inside of him. In James, it teaches us that we should do the same thing. Each of you should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Paul teaches us that in your anger, you should not sin. In your anger, do not sin. He doesn't say never be angry. He just says when you get angry, don't sin. I hope you're getting the picture by now that anger itself isn't bad, but your response to it can be either healthy or unhealthy, destructive or constructive, honoring to God or disappointing to God, and you have the opportunity to choose. What you can't choose are your circumstances. All of our circumstances in life will go up and down at a variety of different times, but you can choose how you respond to those circumstances. I was watching a woman in Panera and the way that she responded to her circumstances the other day. I was studying for my message, and I could see her out of the corner of my eye. I would guess she was somewhere around 80 years old, and she was in a wheelchair. And she was not just riding upright in a wheelchair. She was frail and in her wheelchair. And in the wheelchair, she would lean over towards the front, and her arms would dangle down somewhere around her ankles. And she would get herself around Panera by pushing with her feet in very small motions, pushing her wheelchair in a variety of different directions while leaning over. And when she wanted to eat at her table, she would have to take her arms and use her arms to lift her body up so that she could eat her muffin or drink her coffee or whatever she was eating at the time. Well, as I watched her out of the corner of my eye, at one moment I saw some napkins flutter down towards the ground. She had knocked them off the table. And thinking that I would be chivalrous, I went over to go and help her out as she leaned down to try and pick them up on her own. And I said, hey, can I help you grab these napkins? And I swear I did not know she could move this fast. Her left arm goes, no! And I looked at her and stepped back, and she said to me, if life wasn't a challenge, with a big smile on her face, it wouldn't be worth living. And so I sat down. And I watched her for 3 minutes, no kidding, for 3 minutes work on positioning her wheelchair in just the right place so that her hands could get to the napkins, put them on the table, and then she went back to eating. And when she got done, she kind of turned her face to the side, and she looked at me and she said, I've raised 5 children. All of them have college educations. And the way that they got there is that I taught them that they should never back down from a challenge. I said, yes, ma'am. You know, she is a model of somebody who had very adverse circumstances. She could be angry, she could be full of pain, or she could view it as a challenge that is there to be conquered. And every day, from her position in the wheelchair, she saw life as a challenge to be conquered. There are solutions to anger. And here's what the Proverbs says one of them is. Proverbs 14, 16, and 17 says this, a wise man fears the Lord and shuns evil, but a fool is hot-headed and reckless. A quick-tempered man does foolish things, and a crafty man is hated. Here's the good news from Proverbs 14, is you can end the cycle of anger in your life, in your family, in your workplace, and in your generation. You can end that cycle. But just like the rest of wisdom, it begins with the fear of the Lord. Did you notice in verse 16 it said, a wise man fears the Lord and shuns evil, but a fool is hot-headed and reckless. It begins with saying, God, you're the center of my life, and if you're the center of my life, I'm going to believe whatever you say about me. And if God says that you're of amazing value, that you're of so much value to me that I would give my one and only son to die in your place, you're worth that much to me, you're a child of the King, you matter to me, then it's true that those things matter. It's true that you matter to God and you're a person of high value. If, in fact, you're a person of high value, then it doesn't matter what other people say about you. And if they take pot shots at your value or your self-worth, it doesn't have to affect you at all because you know you're of infinite value to an infinite God who infinitely loves you. In addition to that, when you begin to fear the Lord, you'll find that you take joy in Him. One of the keys in the Psalms is that the joy of the Lord is my strength. And as researchers have done research on anger, they found a very simple principle comes into play. When your frustration level gets higher than your joy level, you're very susceptible to anger. But if your joy level is higher than your frustration level, you're not very susceptible to anger. If life circumstances go up and down, then the question we have to ask is, where do we find our joy? Well, the psalmist says the joy of the Lord is our strength. Why? Because God has an infinite amount of joy that He wants to give you, and He's always available regardless of your circumstances. You look to Him for joy. You realize that in Him is a God who loves you, who died for you, who thinks you're the best, who's offered you forgiveness for your past, who offers you hope for the future, who's got a plan for your life and wants to use you in His purposes in this world. And when you begin to think about all of those things, and when you begin to remember the times where your relationship with God was strong and vibrant, all of a sudden this joy begins to store up inside of your body. And as you store up that joy, you're in a much better place when the frustrations hit your life. So you continue on. Not only do you find joy in the Lord, but just in life in general. Smile and worship and laugh and hang out with people that are funny people. And that brings joy into your life. Keep these things consistent, and you'll be on strong footing when the internet crashes at work, or when you get surprised with an $800 car bill, or when it's Sunday morning and somebody is making you late for church because you just want to get there so that you can worship and learn more about kindness. Right? You're laughing because that happened to you this morning, didn't it? So that's what you can do to set yourself up for success. What about in the moment? If you feel yourself getting angry in the moment, what do? Well, number one, you pause, okay? When you feel the lava beginning to erupt inside of you, when you've got those physiological changes that are happening that let you know, hey, I'm getting angry right now, the best thing you can do is just pause for a moment and realize my amygdala is getting hijacked right about now. Now, I don't want to do something that I'm going to regret. And then I'd encourage you to remove yourself from the situation, probably for about 15 to 30 minutes. It's even helpful to go to another room at this point, and then begin doing some things. Ask yourself a question. Hey, is this thing that I'm arguing about, will it matter 5 years from now? Will it matter 5 months from now? Will it matter 5 minutes from now? And if the answer is no, just begin to cool your jets. Next thing you do is you talk to God and you start bringing your issues to Him. I've noticed that when I pray, it's very hard for me to pray anger prayers to God, especially anger directed towards another person. Like, have you ever tried to do this anger prayer? Dear Lord, please help me to cuss this jerk out and knock his block off in the love of Jesus. It just doesn't come out of your mouth that way. When you pray, you find that God begins to take over and give you perspective, bring healing to the broken places and solution for the problems, and then you can go back to that person and apologize for your part of the misery that you caused, and maybe by then you'll have a constructive way to resolve that issue. Now, for some of you, it's not just what happens in the moment. You've got some issues that have been dogging you for a long, long time. And you know that there is not an equality between the circumstances that you find and your level of anger, that your level of anger is more frequent and more high than you would like it to be. What do? Well, number one thing you do is you ask God to change you from the inside out. God's got the power to do that. He does it on a regular basis. A little bit later in this service, we're going to invite you to come forward and receive prayer for anger issues in your life. If you're somebody who's got some issues and you know it, then come to the front and receive prayer. Have the humility to do that, and you'll see that happen. There's a ministry in our church called the Theophostic Prayer Ministry, and it helps people to go back to times earlier in their life and bring the light and love of God into those situations in such a way that it heals some of your darkest places. And there's going to be a seminar for how to lead people in theophostic prayer, which includes application of theophostic prayer in your own life. And that's going to be starting in the month of August. And if you've got some of those issues, that may be a key to helping you resolve some of those dark places in your past. Some of you need to go find a counselor. If you find yourself overreacting to situations, if you've tried simple things to help get through that, if you know that your issues are very complex or tied to your childhood or come from wartime, well, counseling may be your best bet to help you begin to deal with those issues. Others of you may not need a professional counselor. You may just need somebody who will talk with you and listen to your issues, support you, and pray with you. I mean, maybe you've had a recent job loss, or you're in conflict with your kids, or maybe you're somebody who's got some medical issues that are causing huge stress, or financial issues that are huge stress in your life. And what you really need is just somebody who will talk with you, listen to you, and pray. We've got a ministry called the Stevens Ministry here. And the Stephen Ministry has people that are highly trained and would love to just pray with you and talk to you about the issues that are going on in your life. And you can get one of those by just calling the number on the card that you received when you walked in this morning. If you didn't get one, pick it up on the tables as you leave. And what you'll find is that there are people there who are willing to care for you and not judge you, just support you in your time of need. Those are some things you can do if you're dealing with this in the long haul. I've got one more verse that I just can't resist talking about this morning, and it's Proverbs chapter 15, verse 1. It says, "A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." I wanted to talk about this because it's been one of the most transformational proverbs in my life over the last 20 years. A gentle answer turns away wrath. And I found that it's true, that when people have anger issues that they're coming to me with, when they want to talk to me about difficult issues that have caused pain and anger in their lives, well, oftentimes what they need more than anything from me is just a gentle answer, and it turns away the wrath of the person that you're talking to and the anger of that particular event. It's easy when one person is angry and the next one responds with anger and the next one responds with anger to ratchet things up until thermonuclear war breaks out. But the way to stop that cycle oftentimes is as simple as a gentle answer. Absorbing another person's anger and forgiving them and releasing the bitterness in your life is sometimes the best thing that you can do. Now, hear me well on this, because I'm not saying that if you're somebody who is being abused by an angry person, you should just take it. If there's perpetual rage that's going on in your life, especially if it leads to physical violence, then you need to get out and get help. But what I am saying is that in most non-abuse cases, something has to stop the cycle of anger. Somebody needs to absorb the pain. And sometimes a gentle answer is all it needs to take to derail the anger cycle and get you on a healthy path. God did this kind of thing for us. He absorbed our anger and our pain, and it cost him a lot more than just a gentle answer. He said, I want to make things right between me and humanity that's done so many things to offend me, that's expressed their anger and their hostility and reckless words and rash decisions against me. He said, I want to resolve that issue by taking it on myself, by absorbing the pain. And so he did. He took it on the chin, and he took it on the back, and he took it on his legs, and he took it in holes in his hands and feet. He took the pain for us by dying on the cross so that we might be forgiven of all of our angry past and be given new life in him. Some people see Jesus' death on the cross, and you need to accept that for yourself. You may be somebody who says, I've never trusted in that for myself. I never realized that Jesus took on himself all of the anger and pain and sin that I've caused, and that brings you forgiveness and new life, and you need to trust him. Others of you need to model yourself after him and say, if Jesus was willing to take on all of that pain and strife, so I will be willing to absorb some of that pain as well in order to bring about reconciliation and right relationships, just the way that Jesus did. You see, Jesus' gentle answer that turned away wrath in the midst of his dying on the cross, his gentle answer was, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. When the soldiers were beating him and spitting on him and cursing his name, making fun of him, he said, Father, would you forgive them because they don't know what they're doing? It's the gentle answer that brings us forgiveness and new life. And the beatings that we gave him, he absorbed on our behalf. Says the same thing for us so that we can say it for others. Now, this morning I mentioned to you that I'm going to be inviting people to come forward for prayer, and I'd like to begin that process of inviting people right now. So here's what I want to see. Everybody in all our venues, Worship Center, Sarpy, right here in Access, everybody stand up right now. Just go ahead and stand up. And in a few minutes, we're going to play some music, and we're going to invite people to come forward to receive prayer. Not yet, but just in a few minutes. And here's who I want to see come forward. If you're somebody who needs prayer because you have anger issues, then you come forward and receive prayer. If you're a rager, a door slammer, or a cusser, come forward. If you're a mom who's got 3 young kids and you just can't hold it together some days, you come forward. If you're a teen who flies into fits of venom, physically or verbally, and you're just tired of moving in that direction, you come forward. If you can't stop yourself in the moment and you just need God's help, come forward. There's going to be some people up here, spiritual life elders and folks who are pastors and people who are just really good at praying for folks in tough situations. They'll be here for no judgment prayer on you, to be able to invite the power of God to be in your life and to make some changes. I want to invite you to come forward as well if you have something in your life that's causing a continual low-grade anger. Maybe it's a painful loss from your past. Maybe it's a sense of injustice or getting ripped off in life by your boss, by your family of origin, by an abuser from your past. Maybe you're in a financial pinch and you're just grouchy all the time, or you're not getting very much sleep. And you need God to intervene, to help you to get past, to forgive, to move on, to be able to have an attitude that honors Jesus. Come on down in just a minute, and we'll pray with you. Or maybe you're somebody today and you live with an angry person, and you need some freedom from that anger, from that person. You've got some scars in your life, and you want to pray for God's healing in that area. Come on down, and we'll pray for that. Or maybe you're somebody who you need to have your sins forgiven. You say, I know I've done things that are wrong. My anger and the way I've responded in anger is one of those, but I want Jesus' blood to forgive my sins. And I'd love to pray with somebody towards that end. There are people up here who would love to pray with you for that, so that he'll forgive your anger and his anger will never burn against you. So at this point, what I want to do is hand things off to our different venues. Pastor Wendell is in the Worship Center. Pastor Steve is in Sarpy County, and they'll take things from this moment in those venues.